Welcome back to Gamma 23. This is our continuing journey through the book of Corinthians, the Gospel and Community, where faith and life collide. Study 8, Marriage and Sex in the Gospel Community, chapter 7, verses 1 to 16. Remember last week we talked about there are two extremes within the Corinthian church, the liberals, where all things are lawful for me, food is meant for the stomach for the food, so sex is something that we just satiate, right? On the other hand, there are a whole bunch of folk who are conservative. It's good for a man not to have sexual relationship with a woman. This is where we start off with. There's a perceived relationship between asceticism, which is no sex, and spirituality, right? But Verse 2, because of the temptation to sexual immorality, each man should have his own wife and each woman her own husband. That is what Paul wants us to have. It doesn't mean that everyone should get married, but each married person should find satisfaction in his own spouse. So, marriage and sex. Husband should give to his wife her conjugal rights, and likewise the wife to her husband. For the woman does not have authority over her own body, but the husband does. Likewise, the husband does not have authority over his own body, but the wife does. Do not deprive one another, except by agreement for a limited time, that you may devote yourself to prayer, but then come together again so that Satan may not tempt you because of a lack of self-control. So here the topic is conjugal rights. All right? So the wife doesn't have authority over her own body, doesn't belong to her. Husband does. Neither does the husband have authority over his own body. There is a mutuality in terms of the relationship. So mutuality in conjugal rights and authority over the body. So therefore, because of that, we do not deprive one another unless under extreme circumstances when they both decided to do so for a period of prayer. So the issue here is spouses depriving one another and basically weaponizing sex in order to manipulate the other partner to do what he or she wants. So the question of conjugal rights is the issue of indebtedness. Not you owe me, but I owe you. We do not have authority over our own body. It's unconditional, whether he pisses you off or not. We actually owe the other partner conjugal rights. All right. So therefore, if we owe them conjugal rights, we cannot weaponize sex by withholding it so that the other person will comply with us. It's very different from a Roman couple in those days, where it's a husband's privilege and the wife has obligations and not vice versa. In the Christian couple, the two belong to one another in total mutuality. His Islamic view, Sheikh Muhammad Zulkifli, 2017, ruling party Barisan Nasional, says denying husband sex is abuse, which is taking this to the extreme. In actual couple's life, there's a condition called desire discrepancy disorder. As time goes on, especially with children coming on, the wife's sexual desire goes right down, whereas the husband's is maintained, and he constantly, therefore, feels left out, and he badgers her for sex and starts blaming her, becoming demanding, critical, and resentful, and she continues to withdraw from him. Because she doesn't seem to understand why. He doesn't understand why her actual desire levels have dropped. And the corroboration from science shows that if we have good sexual communal strength, all right, which is actually equal to a person's motivation to meet the other partner's needs, then the marriage stays very strong. Here's a quotation. Our findings suggest that if one partner is interested in having sex, but the other partner isn't in the mood, being motivated to meet a partner's sexual needs can be beneficial for both partners. It is very important, however, that this motivation to meet a partner's sexual needs comes from a place of agency where people feel that they are able to meet their partner's needs and a delight to see one's partner happy. So the question of mutuality is you actually meet the needs to make, because you're happy to meet the other person's needs to make that person happy. So all these strategies to counter desire discrepancy, you communicate more, you schedule sex, having a date night, etc. as it goes on. All right. So the only time sex stops, okay, is when there's mutual agreement and for a period of prayer, so that Satan will not tempt them. And this is a concession, not a command. It's something that Paul concedes. All right. So important lessons for us is that in marriage, it's the importance and sex and centrality of sex. It protects each other from the dangers of immorality in a godless culture where one or the other partner may stray. The spouse cannot meet all your needs, but there is one need that only the spouse can uniquely meet, and that's sexual needs. And sexual activity is godliness within your own marriage. So we need to avoid extremes. No sex, or sex just in your brain. We need to teach the children that it is not the stalk that brings the child, but where sex plays its role within a healthy marriage. Now, next topic is divorce. To the marriage, I get married, I give you discharge, not I, but the Lord. The wife should not separate from her husband, but if she does, she should remain unmarried or else be reconciled to her husband, and the husband should not divorce his wife. So here, there is no divorce. And also no remarriage. The woman should not separate from her husband, but if she does, she should remain unmarried or else be reconciled with her husband. There's no remarriage as well. All right, so the issue is the sanctity of marriage. Mark says, whoever divorces wife and marries another commits adultery against her, and if she divorces her husband and marries another, she commits adultery. There's a sanctity of marriage, the unbreakable bond. The only bond is broken by death. Verse 39, a wife is bound to her husband as long as he lives, but if her husband dies, she's free to be married to whom she wishes, only in the Lord, though. Only in the Lord. Yet in my judgment, she is happier if she remains as she is, and I think I too have the Spirit of God. So the only time you break the bond is when the spouse dies. And it's very interesting, right? She can marry again, but only in the Lord. You see what I mean? A lot of people will argue and say, look, I can marry whoever I want. There's no Bible verse that tells us that we can marry non-Christians. But here, Paul very clearly states that you want to marry again. Yes, you can marry only in the Lord, which means even if you're not married before and you want to get married, it's only in the Lord. That is a given. All right? So if a husband and wife cannot be reconciled to one another, then how can they be expected to become models of reconciliation before a fractured and broken world? That picture which we paint to the world is our witness. All right? So we need to maintain our position at conversion. To the rest I say, not I, the Lord, but the Lord, that if any brother has a wife who is an unbeliever and she consents to live with him, he should not divorce her. If a woman has a husband who is unbeliever and he consents to live with her, she should not divorce him. So we should maintain your position. You can become a Christian and your wife is not a Christian or vice versa. You should not divorce. You should stay as it is. Okay? Why should you stay as it is? That's a rationale. All right? For the unbelieving husband is made holy because of his wife, and the unbelieving wife is made holy because of her husband. Otherwise, the children will be unclean. But as it is, they are holy. All right? So here, the rationale for remaining is that the grace of God is at work through the believer towards the members of his or her household. Okay? The made holy, what does it mean? It could be moral, ethical salvation, which means you actually save your spouse so they shouldn't leave. Or there's a potential for realizing salvation. Let's take this, all right? Does it mean that you stay with your non-Christian spouse because you could save them? Trouble is, we can't save people. Only Christ can save. We cannot save another person, so that couldn't be the one. All right? But if you look in the particular passage, there's a word, the children would become unclean, which means this brings to mind Jewish ritual cleanliness. You know, the Jews, certain foods they can eat, certain foods they can't eat. They've got to clean themselves before going to the synagogue, etc. Well, the background here is verse 1. It's good for a man not to have sexual relationship with women. Some people think, because they think having sex defiles them. So therefore, if having sex will defile them, having a pagan believer sleeping with you would even defile a believer even much more, wouldn't it? Right? So therefore, but Paul's position is different. Paul says in Romans 11:16, if dough is offered as the first fruits is holy, so is the whole lump. And if the root is holy, so are the branches. What he's saying, if one partner is holy, it offers the opportunity that the whole lump will be actually holy, not the other way around. So instead of the pagan defiling the believers actually sanctify the pagan. The consecration of the part sanctifies the whole, rather than the small part defiling the whole. All right? So it's more likely that the meaning of sanctified or made holy is the potential for realizing salvation. So therefore, the grace of God is at work through the believer towards members of his household. So if a non-Christian spouse stay with you, the children stay with you, they would have an opportunity to have God's grace at work so that they will come into the covenant, they would become believers as well. So, right? So, divorce, when is it permissible? If the unbelieving partner separates. Let it be so. For such cases, the brother, sister is not enslaved. God has called you to peace. For how do you know, wife, whether you will save your husband? How do you know, husband, whether you will save your wife? Okay? Brother and sister, you are not enslaved. If the non-Christian wants to leave, you can let them go. All right? So, in such cases, the brother or sister is not enslaved. What does not enslaved mean? It could mean two things. That the marital bond is broken. You're no longer bounded to the spouse, and if they leave, you can remarry. Okay? Or the obligation to maintain the marriage is now released. So you're no longer obligated to maintain the marriage. Okay? What about this? If you interpret as the marital bond being broken. But the problem is, if you look back, remarriage in verse 11 is prohibited. When a wife should not separate from her husband, or if she does, yes, she can be divorced, but she must remain unmarried or reconciled. Right? So based on that, it's more likely when he says that when the non-Christian spouse leaves, the person left behind is not obligated to maintain the marriage, which means you allow that person to go. All right? So, okay, so here the unbelieving spouse leaves. The ones left behind are no longer obligated to maintain the marital bond. Okay? Guiding principles for living under the gospel. All right? So he says, each person should live the life that the Lord has assigned him and to which God has called. This is my rule in all the churches. Was anyone at a time of his call already circumcised? Let him not seek to remove the marks of circumcision. Was anyone at the time of his call uncircumcised? Let him not seek circumcision, for neither circumcision nor counts for anything, nor uncircumcision, by keeping the commandments of God. Each one should remain in a condition which he was called. Were you a bondservant when you were called? Do not be concerned about it. But if you can gain your freedom, avail yourself the opportunity. But he who was called in the Lord as a bondservant is a freedman of the Lord. Likewise, he who was free when called as a bondservant of Christ. You were bought with a price. Do not become bondservants of men. So brothers, in whatever condition each was called, let him remain with the Lord. So the gospel rearranges our priorities. There are religious markers and social situation. All right, the three dimensions of the gospel it looks back towards the cross and forward to resurrection. It's upside down incarnation. Up is down is up, and there's atonement that affects us from inside out. So the religious markers, circumcision, baptism, church attendance, membership, all these are outside in. We don't do these things in order to be saved. We do these things because we are saved. So obedience is a response to grace. That's why we keep the commandments of God. And what about the slave? He was called in the Lord as a bondservant. He's actually a freed man in the Lord. Likewise, he was free when called as a bondservant of Christ. You were bought with a price, so you do not become bondservants of men. So therefore, you've got slave and you've got a free, but as Paul is concerned, they are both bought with a price. They are both slaves of Christ. So it doesn't really matter. The important thing is that you were bought with a price. And so therefore in real life we are bondservants of Christ. And we should not regard as our restricting characteristic slavery to men. All right? So, but you're free to seek social improvement. Were you a bond servant when you call? Do not be concerned about it. But if you gain your freedom, avail yourself of the opportunity. So, but do not be overly preoccupied with social change. If you're a slave, all you want to do is be free. And that consumes you day and night. No, we are to look for more important priorities. Okay, because when you are freed by the blood of Christ, you're already free. You are a bondservant of Christ. Okay, so the overriding consideration is why is it this? Is because this is what I mean, brothers. The appointed time has grown short. From now onwards, those who have wives live as though they had none. Those who mourn as though they were not mourning. Those who rejoice as though they were not rejoicing. Those who buy as though they had no goods. And those who deal with the world as though they had no dealings with it. For the present form in this world is passing away. So time is growing short. It doesn't matter which job you're in. All right? The important thing, whether job, money, status, that defines us, that is ambition. That should not be your overwhelming concern, because we are in extra time. The game is almost over. We should not be so overly concerned at our station in life, our ambition in life, but more be focused in the gospel and living our lives that we may glorify Him. May God add a blessing to His word.